Welcome, game dev adventurers, to the Indie Game Lunch Hour. Today we're talking with Spencer Cohen about conventions and conferences as an indie game dev.
The Indie Game Lunch Hour.
In our live magical podcast, we give game developers the chance to hear stories of breaking in from industry experts, as well as directly ask them questions about their areas of expertise in the second half of each episode. As always, I'm your host, Willem Delmenthal, the headmaster here at the Indie Game Academy and the Purple Wizard of Games. And this is a mostly unedited recording of a weekly event we host in our Discord. So we'd love to have you swing by and join us for the next one and even ask your own questions live. You can find links to join down below. Today, we are talking with Spencer Cohen, who's a producer at Abducted Monkeys, famous for Trouble in Tornado Town and a number of other games. And we're talking specifically about conventions and conferences as an indie dev, which is a wonderful, niched topic, but they are incredibly important ways for you as an indie developer to get a little bit of attraction and a little bit of attention. So, Spencer, what are you having for lunch today? And welcome to the show.
Thank you. I just finished up some lunch. I made myself a bagel with some egg, avocado, mozzarella, salt, and pepper.
Oh my God, that sounds delicious. So fancy.
Yeah, it was great. Yeah.
That's good. I've been I've got some a bunch of stuff happening, in life as we all do. So for the past 3 or 4 days in a row, I've gotten Dunkin' Donuts for breakfast. Don't tell anyone.
That's fair. Hey, it's all good. I only made it because I had the time this morning.
Nice. That's good. That's good. I'm glad you're taking care of yourself, Spencer. It's very important.
Absolutely.
Awesome. Well, I'm excited to talk about conventions and conferences. For anybody who may not know, anytime that we bring a guest onto the show, we actually ask them what they want to talk about. And we'll modify that a little bit sometimes if we feel like their pitch for a topic doesn't really match our audience. But almost always, it is what the guest wants to talk about. So as a result, I don't think we've talked about conventions and conferences before, or at least we haven't spent an entire episode on them. Which is solid, because this is also one of the most important tools for gaining an audience as an indie, but also one of the most important tools for the user feedback cycle as an indie, getting actual player feedback and play tests in. And then besides that, it's also I've seen it used essentially as its own standalone milestone. Well, we got to get the alpha done because we're going to PAX next week. So I think it brings a lot of value to indies, and I'd love to hear your perspective on it. Before we get there, though, as always, we got to start with the origin story. So, Spencer, tell us where you are today and how you got there.
Yeah, so today I've been managing my indie game studio, Abducted Monkeys, for about 3 years now.
Nice, congrats.
But thank you. The journey of mine kind of started as far back as late middle school, where I consistently kept a kind of a notepad on my phone, through the Notes app, of kind of just documenting, making a personal encyclopedia of game ideas, and just whenever I would play a new game or play something I was continuously on, I would always make notes of what I liked, what I didn't like. If I were to make this myself, how would it go? And as I got later into high school, I started to take classes in graphic design, some classes in programming. Started to dabble around with some game modding. The first game that I tried to modify myself was Starbound. That game is a very nice modding community. Other inspirations or games-wise were the series Little Big Planet, because the user-generated content in that community is just really inspiring. Then I went to college for game design and production at Drexel University. And there is where my game studio started. They have a program there called the Entrepreneurial Game Studio, where students can go in and, outside of their class hours, develop a game studio, build it, make a game, and the goal is to release a game on a commercial platform. So that was Trouble in Tornado Town. That started in early 2022. It released last year in January of 2023. We've added some post-release updates. That's a game where you play as a tornado, destroying towns and cities. We recently added a leaderboard system to that, and so you can race for the best times.
Nice. That's awesome. And more?
And then there's a little bit more. We are working on our second game, which is a game called Lockjaw Robo Royale. We actually just hit our Kickstarter milestone for that about a month ago. So we're very excited to continue development on that. We're hoping to develop and release it before the end of this year.
Awesome. Nice. Congratulations. Yeah, I think something that you definitely bring to the table, Spencer, is that indie perspective. Did you, out of curiosity, did you run a Kickstarter for Trouble in Tornado Town?
No, so that actually started as a game jam game. So the way that the entrepreneurial game studio (EGS) does their program is sometimes they'll run game jams so that
Mhm.
the students can get like game ideas going. So a friend of mine entered one of their game jams. It was themed around destruction,
Mhm.
and he and my designer friend started to just kind of prototype something in 48 hours, and they pulled some pre-made assets from like a Cinti pack, um, developed a quick prototype of a tornado destroying a city. Is very rudimentary, but because a lot of the art was already made, they could just focus on designing.
Mhm.
And they delivered a pretty nice game. Funnily enough, I don't think it won that game jam, but um, I checked it out a few days later and I was like, there's so many ways you can expand this. Can I join on? And from there, I just kind of became like the project manager slash producer of the team.
That's awesome. Yeah, that's also really exciting. By the way, the fact that you, I think it's a common story, or just a traditional game dev story that you worked on something for a game jam, you made something kind of silly, and just because it sounded interesting, and then you went, oh, wait, this is kind of cool, and then decided to continue it. That's another reason for all of you to do game jams. If you aren't already doing game jams, do game jams, make games. That's it. Awesome. This story is a really exciting one, I think, because it's one that people can really follow, and is one that doesn't require anybody except you to make it happen. Nobody handed you anything, Spencer. You got it all yourself. Congratulations on that. And it's really cool that you just finished a Kickstarter. I don't remember the exact stat, but I think it's only like 30% of game Kickstarter succeed. So yeah, well done. Top 30% already.
I didn't know
Um,
that. Interesting, yeah.
yeah, I don't know the exact stat. That might not be right, but I think that's about right. All right, so tell us about conventions and conferences. So like I said, I've heard them used in a bunch of different ways. And some indies will hit up kind of like local conventions or the easy to use ones, but I think for the most part, indie developers aren't really utilizing conventions and conferences in a major way. So tell us about that.
So what's interesting about that is the conferences and conventions that you can go to don't always have to be game themed. In
Mhm.
fact, my team got started in that space through having some nice connections from Drexel. One of our professors at the time had a lot of connections with a conference called Philly Tech Week because we were located in Philadelphia at the time. And I think we've been there for we've gone to that specific one for the past
Mhm.
3 years. And that one was really interesting because we're actually probably one of the usually we're like one or two of the only like game companies showing at like events like that.
Okay.
And that can be good too because you're more wanted in conferences that aren't necessarily game themed because you can provide entertainment for people on the floor talking to businesses, but you're also a business. So you kind of get the best of both worlds where you can get people to enjoy your stuff automatically because you're making a game and you're not trying to
Mhm.
sell them something per se. You're just like, oh yeah, just play my game. Um, and so that's been like a really good introduction to like the rest of the conferences that we've done as well. Um, Definitely look into ones that are within your area. Don't go overboard on like your budget for conferences. And when you're at the conferences themselves, I would say there's like a big three rules that I would like recommend following. And that is bring the right equipment, prepare for the worst, and get comfy. Um, so the right equipment can be like anything from speakers to controllers, monitors, extension cables. Make sure you have all the physical equipment required to show and play your game and bring the right amount. And that kind of goes into like preparing for the worst. Um, One part of that is bringing the right amount of stuff. So like if your game is, for example, a local multiplayer brawler that requires 4 players or up to 2 to 4 players, bring 4 more controllers if you can. Another thing is you want to bring a bunch of people with you if possible. At the end of the day, you're probably developing this game with a team, so you gotta be able to rely on each other, and also take shifts to get lunch. So bringing extra people is always helpful. You should always bring snacks and water because while there might be food there, sometimes you get a really busy booth and you kind of have to eat while on the show floor. And because exhibitors are usually given that right, that's beneficial because usually when you go into these conventions or conferences, like, you're not allowed to bring in outside food. But if you're like showing there, they get it. So that is something you usually should take advantage of. Um, Another big thing with the preparing for the worst is be prepared to debug the game live. We've
Mhm.
we've almost become like we have like an inside joke on our team now where like if we're bringing a game to a conference, we're expecting it to be more broken than usual because you're getting more playtesting than usual. You're getting like hundreds of people running through your game, figuring out new ways to break it. So we always try to bring at least one extra computer other than like the one that's showing the game, so that when it inevitably breaks, you can debug live on the show floor and plug in a flash drive or an SSD to make sure you can swap builds. Um, and then also be prepared for no internet. Usually these
Mhm.
conferences will like have internet, but it doesn't always mean they'll work great because you can have like thousands of people using it at a time. And it's not always free internet too. So if you can rely on something like mobile hotspot, or you can work out something with the companies that are hosting the convention, that's something that's enormously important. And then of course, lastly, you got to get comfy. So one thing that we've been doing is we've kind of copied from another team from Drexel University, Gossamer Games. What they like to do is bring a couch to their booth at every conference they go to. People love couches because they usually will give you like plastic chairs by default. But
Yeah.
if you can like have the space and afford to bring a couch, people are immediately gravitated to that.
How do you get a couch to your booth?
So we were fortunate enough to have a member with a truck and a disassemblable IKEA couch. So
Nice.
like they're the fast few ones. We've literally just taken the couch apart, put it in the bed of his truck, and just get there and
Yeah.
figure it all out like when we get there. Um, but there's probably a few ways to do it. I've seen like options of like inflatable couches, but we went with an IKEA couch just because he also could use it for his furniture in his apartment. So double down on the usage of what you can bring.
I love
Um,
it.
Another thing is like there's a big culture for bringing rugs. Like especially at Magfest, there's this inside joke where like you have to if you're not bringing a rug, you're not part of like the rug cult.
Mhm.
And they kind of make it as a joke to kind of influence you to bring one because sometimes you're standing on like concrete floors otherwise, and you got to be like comfortable. You're standing there for like 8 to 10 hours for a conference day, so bring a rug.
Rugs also just make your booth feel so much more professional too.
Yeah, it kind of adds to like the comfy thing with the couch. If you're comfortable, your attendees will probably be comfortable. More people will come through your booth.
Mhm.
And wear some good shoes as well. But I would say like that's kind of like the big points of like running a booth at the conference.
I love it. There's a lot of really good stuff to pull out of this, and it's funny. Like I personally love conventions, and I love doing conventions, and I'm sort of a glutton for them. I approach them almost like game jams, where I sleep very little, I scream a lot, but at the end of it, I don't have a voice anymore, and I fully expect to be dead for the next couple of days afterwards. But during the convention itself, I'm giving it absolutely as much energy as I can. Some of these points are really good ones that I can totally agree with. I think expecting the worst is a really simple one, especially for us being in the development world. Number one, you're going to get more players than ever before. You're going to have so many people playing your game all at once, and uniquely to a convention, you're going to have so many people playing it all at once with you right there watching. So you'll also just simply notice more bugs than ever before. And so having Rick in the comments said, my thing is 3 days, 3 builds, and no sleep.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
having the capacity, absolutely, having the capacity to fix little things on the floor is good. I would encourage you to the best of your ability to actually not do that though, because it opens up a whole can of worms. You'll push a fix for one thing and you'll break something else. So sometimes it just comes down to accepting the bugs and having workarounds. And
Yeah,
then
absolutely.
definitely, yeah, and then be prepared for the worst. So there's a couple things you can do. Backup builds are good. Having your game on a thumb drive is good. Having just a video recording of your game is like the end all be all. If the world is ending, at least I can show them a video. Very good. Anything you can do to make sure that like if a meteor hits, you can still get value out of this convention. um, is good. Love the concept of getting comfy. I think it's hilarious to bring an entire couch. I was trying to imagine how I would do that. Maybe I'd bring like ottomans or something because that's a little bit more realistic to fit. But I love it. And yeah, these are some solid points. I'm curious. Here's one of the things. So this is a lot of sort of the logistical stuff of making sure you get value out of your booth, and making sure that nothing goes wrong and that you are comfortable. Taking lunch breaks is good. Making sure you have shifts established with your team is also really good. But here's one of my big questions about conventions that I think a lot of people wonder is just how to run that well. How do you get maximum value out of your time with those users? Are you doing like sales techniques? Are you shouting at people out in the audience? You know, how do you get people to come into your booth, engage with you, and then hit your CTA, whatever that might be, signing up for your wish list, buying the game on the spot? How do you make money, Spencer?
Big one that we like to do is bring a whiteboard.
Okay, interesting.
And that way you could kind of switch your strategy on the spot.
Okay.
So we usually bring one of our artists with us if possible, so that we can have them do some funny things on the whiteboard. When we were showing off, yeah, we got a comment in the chat about our recent strategy. When we went to too many games in June, we had a whiteboard that we changed on the second day to say "Hot robots here" for Lockjaw, and so that brought in a lot of people, and then some of the other booths started to join in and had their own versions of the funny like whiteboards and signs. So I would say like be humorous. I think is a big one because it makes you more amicable. And people want to talk to that more than just like kind of like play this game here. I think another big part of it, a big part of making the sell is like be able to introduce your game in like one sentence, have your elevator pitch ready for
Mhm.
when people do ask about it, but don't be like an aggressive salesperson. People are at these conferences because they want to play games. Like you don't have to sell them on the fact that they have to play a game. They're there to try things around them, and that's why they paid for the ticket. And so pitch your game really quickly in the beginning. If they have questions, that's when you answer them. But otherwise, I like to kind of like passively let them enjoy the game, figure it out, because that discoverability is I think is really huge for both your playtesting data as a team, but also for the player experience. Um, but towards the end is when you make sure to thank them and get to your call to action. In our last conferences, I was usually wishlisting on Steam, visiting our company website, seeing projects we work on. Usually, we give out business cards with like a QR on the back that leads to our website, so that you can kind of have like a collective place to see all that. Um, but I would say that yeah, those are kind of like the simple things to stick to for keeping a pretty smooth experience for the players going in and out.
When you go to conventions, do you have like do you decide on a specific CTA? Specifically, we're trying to get wish lists. Specifically, like, do you set goals for the convention?
We usually don't set numbers mainly just because of like where our budgets are at. But the I would definitely say like we have our goals set, and we make sure that the team is like all on board with that. So when we were showing off Lockjaw Too Many Games, it was getting the wish list, and because the Kickstarter was still going on, a big part of us going to Too Many Games was actually to get more Kickstarter funding. And
Mhm.
we did get a pretty good amount from the conference. I think it paid back about even or a little bit more. So like a little bit of profit off of like what we paid to get to the conference. So definitely having a goal while you're at a conference makes it a lot more impactful, and it motivates you to get the right things achieved while you're there as well.
Mhm. I definitely couldn't agree more with that. Okay, so I've got a couple things that I want to pull out from what you've said again. Sort of like that you more or less said. The first one is actually iteration, which you mentioned with the whiteboards. So having a whiteboard up that you can just play with, and like on the second day, you came up with a slogan that like people super loved and brought them to your booths. Um, we're game developers. The main thing we do is we iterate. You know, we make a game that's like pretty crappy, and then we iterate, and it gets less crappy over time until it's awesome. Same practice can be used on the convention floor to great effect, to tremendous effect. So there's three main things that I was actually just doing this with Jess, Haley, and Hamna because we're about to be at Play NYC. They're in the audience. We're joking about how we didn't intentionally schedule this for this week, but it's like perfect timing. Um, there's three things that I encourage you all to practice when you're on the convention floor. The first one is your hook, which is basically like how you get somebody to come engage with you. So Hot Robots here is a great hook. That's how you get somebody to come look at it. When I was running Mew and Me, which is the cat games, I used to just say, these are video games for cats. And that was often enough for people to be like, what? I need to come talk to this person. So whatever it is that gets the person to kind of stop walking by the booth and come talk to you, that hook is really powerful. And then also it can very much be different for different people. For some people, a super humorous hook works. For another person, something a little bit more serious or like technical maybe might work. And so it's very much about you kind of iterating on your own personal hook for this product. So that's the first one, hook. Iterate on that. And then the call to action is the second one, which is you talking about like goals, which is basically the conversation you have to actually try to convert this people into whatever that goal might be, into wish lists or whatever. So that conversation might be like, this is the best damn game ever. There's going to be so many hot robots, or I don't know, whatever the little pitch is, the mini pitch that gets them to convert to that all important number that you're trying to get. And once again, you're going to iterate on that. It's going to change over the multiple days of the convention, and it might be different for different people. And then the third one I always recommend you practice is actually your objection handling. You don't need to be too salesy, but a little bit of salesy is good. So knowing sort of what you're going to say when people say no, to just give them a second poke, and don't do more than two pokes, is also good to practice. Goals are also great. I like to have hard numbers, but once again, it's sort of up to you and your team what works well for your team. Hard numbers can be really stressful. If you don't hit them, you get very disappointed and demoralized. But at least having established like this is the primary thing we're trying to get out of this convention is really important as well. What do you think about that takeaway, Spencer?
Yeah, I agree with all that. Absolutely. And I think another note to make is we weren't even clickbaiting with the hot robots thing because we were showing off a volcano level. So they were literally
That's
melting.
perfect. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, that is exactly like the kind of thing that you're going to come up with probably on the spot after saying it to some random person and having them giggle, like it
Yep,
does.
pretty much.
Yeah, it takes that experimentation, and then once you find it, that tends to stick for a while. It tends to be useful for a long time. I love that. So let's see what else. I think like why don't we talk about post convention a little bit? So we've talked about basically like setting up the booth, making sure that your booth is comfortable and inviting. At IGA, when we set up booths, we love to have the booths be interactive in some way. And I mean more than just playing games. So basically, we're inviting people in and actually trying to get them to engage with us and be in this booth with us. We like to set up booths. This is something that has always been true for me. We like to set up booths so that there's space to be inside the booth. So I will never set up a table at the edge of the booth so people have to be in the walkway. I always set up that table at the back of the booth. They can come and be with me in this booth. So we talked about booth setup. We talked about actually getting some sales. And now let's talk about post-convention. So we're exhausted. The convention has ended. How do we make sure we squeeze out the last bits of value from committing our time to this thing?
If you can, like going and have some posts drafted up, whether you're doing like social media posts or Kickstarter posts. We had some like sentences here or there ready to kind of show off. We did a lot of our posting kind of like a few days after our conferences usually. We make sure to, during the conferences, to take pictures of your booth, ask for permission of people before you take pictures of them, of course, but gather pictures of you guys enjoying the event as well. It doesn't have to be just pictures of your booth. Definitely have pictures of your booth so you can advertise your product, but a big part of going to these conventions is showing off your stuff, but also having fun, enjoying everything else there. Because especially at game conferences, like you're there to play games as well. So that's why it's good to bring other people. But yeah, like in our recent Too Many Games one, we took a lot of pictures of both our booth getting played at different levels. But there's also great things at game conferences like I think it was called video game wrestling, where people are cosplay wrestling, where everybody dresses up in cosplay and gets on like a wrestling arena. And so we took some pictures of that and kind of like a collage of like chaotic fun combining both our game and the events of the conferences that we were at. So I
Yeah,
would say that definitely a recap with pictures of both your booth and the general experience.
awesome. Yeah, the only other thing I think that's brilliant. I think any amount of basically celebrating the convention, showing off your community that you went there, because in some ways, even when people don't go to the convention itself, it feels good to see the team doing something like that. You know, it's exciting. It shows that you are like on top of it. It shows that you're a team that's putting in the work, first of all, and then also it's just fun, and people like to feel like a part of it, even if they weren't actually there. And that second point, I think, is the additional thing that I would add or take away from what you're saying. Enjoy your convention. The audience can feel that. The people on the floor can feel that. The people who didn't go to the convention can feel that. Setting up your goals and having established, sales tactics and stuff, all good, very good, important. Get your numbers, get your money. Important for you to make money as a developer. But also, like, just enjoy yourself as much as you can, because just like game development itself, we can feel that on the other end. If you're in the booth and just having a great time and making fun of people playing wrestling and I don't know, getting them to say hot robot for you or whatever the hell, if you're just enjoying yourself, I think that makes a huge difference. So I like that as a final takeaway as well. All right. I think it is time for us to move on to some community questions. The first one was way up here. Where are you? Larry. Larry, do you want to come on stage? I haven't invited you to speak. Otherwise, I'll read your question for you. All right. I'm going to read it. Oh, there it is. Hi, Larry. Would you like to ask a question? You're currently muted.
Hey, I figured it out.
There we go. Hi.
Hi. So I was just wanting to know, like, I am trying to go to my first convention, and I have no idea which one to go to. Like, what would you suggest for like an indie being like a good first convention to like get your feet wet and have that experience?
Mm-hmm.
I guess the question I have back for you is, where are you located? Because I think because to answer that question, you kind of have to work with what's nearby.
Yep.
Well, I'm in Portland, so I have like PAX, and I mean I can pretty much make it to any of them
Then I
that
would
I have seen.
say, yeah, then I would say like if you're trying to figure out which one to start with, I would say send out applications to all the ones near you, and see which ones you can get into, because that'll give you a better answer of like what your game is kind of compatible with, like audience wise, and I think that's a good place to start.
A website that I always direct people to is gameconfguide.com. I've shared that on this podcast before. GAMECONFGUIDE.com. And it lists a ton of conventions, including online ones for you to consider. But I would actually agree with Spencer here, Larry. My favorite conventions and the ones that I seem to get the most value from, especially for the dollar, is the local ones. The ones that are often anyway, not the huge ones that everybody knows about. My favorite one in recent memory was the Southern Fried Gaming Expo, which is here in Georgia. And it is like, it's not even a video game focused, but it happens to have a video game area. And we exhibited at it and we did phenomenally at it. And it was far cheaper than a lot of the really big ones. And it was just a ton of fun and we made local friends and stuff. So I would say start with, any local conventions like mid-sized. The little tiny conventions sometimes aren't as worth it, or like the little teeny tiny showcases. But even those are good, especially as a kind of icebreaker for you. So yeah, I'd say local conventions are right. Find what's around you. Google Portland game conventions and then see what pops up.
Awesome, thank you.
Absolutely, Larry. All right. Next, we've got Wendy. Wendy, would you like to come up and speak?
Sure. Hi, Spencer.
Hello.
Kind of the perfect transition, at least in my mind, to the last question to mine is online conferences. So ideally you're going in person, to make those connections, play games, do things, take pictures you wouldn't normally get to, but suggestions for those in between times, maybe some things that are online.
Yeah, I would definitely say you use some of the similar strategies when it comes to like documenting like the conferences that are online. I've been to some online conferences personally outside of games, so I could kind of speak to experience on that. See if you can get permission from the people you're talking to in like collaborative calls or showcasing calls to have some recordings of like you showing off your stuff. Always having some form of documentation of what you did while you were at any conference, whether that be in person or online, I think is really helpful because you can always reuse that and reframe that to show kind of what you did and how you interacted with the community at those conferences.
Cool. Thank you.
Yep.
I've actually never had an online convention where I exhibited that I liked that much, unfortunately. Um, I think there's a I think there's a I feel like we haven't really cracked the perfect online convention formula. Um, Online like GDC like events, online educational events can work pretty well. I think I've been to a bunch of those that are really awesome, but like showcasing my product in an online space has never been super great. So definitely if you can find in-person ones, it's a 10 times better. And then what you'll often find is online conventions will have like some kind of exhibitor like list where they can like click and see your product, but you can't actually like sell it. Like there's no live booth kind of thing. So yeah, look into those, but if you can get in person, it's definitely better.
I think I have like one more note about that. Like if you're making a game that's multiplayer, local multiplayer, I think using online multiplayer tools or something like Steam Remote Play to like let your audience kind of join in and play as if they were with you is a
Mhm.
huge part of showing off a game in like an online space.
That's brilliant, actually. So, like on the floor, you're saying, like inside of a convention, you're bringing people from outside the convention to play with you, or
Yeah, rather in person or if it were like a live stream
yeah,
or some type of like, online interaction.
love that, awesome. Yeah, and for that matter, online conventions good, obviously, but online, if you're trying to get people to play test your game and build an audience, just setting up play testing, and I think you find that mostly through communities, so like the Indie Game Academy, but there's a ton of really awesome ones out there. Work with indies, remote game jobs. What else? The Game Dev Field Guide is the one I like. Any of those communities and just asking people to come and play and setting those up on a regular basis is similar to having a real convention. So maybe that's a way for you to get some online value.
Yeah, absolutely.
Um, yeah. Rick, would you like to ask your question?
Yeah. So I like that you brought up the idea of making changes and live bug fixes to your game. I want to know if you could expand a little bit more on your process. Like, what bugs do you fix live on the table or on the floor? And what do you do like if you notice that, oh, they're trying to go through this level, but everybody's, dying at this point. We want them to get past it. Like, when do you make your more in-depth UX changes, and what do you save for the next convention?
Mhm.
Yeah, it's a great question. So the way that we kind of address like the criticality of issues is first we usually we're bringing games that are some point in development to these conventions. So first off, coming to the convention with multiple different builds that you like understand pretty well, like the issues of, like oh maybe this level doesn't work, so we'll avoid that level when we're showing it off, or in this build this part of the character doesn't work, so we'll avoid that part. But when it comes to like issues that freshly come up, I would say the only ones that we would like fix while people are playing are the ones that will stop the game. Like we're talking like anything that hard crashes the game, anything that soft locks the game, anything that prevents the player from being able to play. Those are absolutely like critical issues that need to be fixed on the floor while you run another build that may not have that issue. But things that can get fixed kind of like the night after a day at the conference, if you have the time, that's the kind of stuff you were describing where it's like, oh, I see a player is not going through this door or not trying these techniques. That you can kind of get a separate build for like A/B testing purposes to see how people interact with it like the next day. But I would say
Mhm.
like I would only push like changes day of that are absolutely preventing the player from like playing the game.
I would agree with that sentiment, and I bet you do too, Rick. I tend to try to make as few actual tech changes on the floor as possible because inevitably they cause other problems. What I prioritize actually is I don't know what to call it, analog solutions, which mostly means, okay, we know that this is happening in this case. We know that some crash is happening when they do X. So we're just going to tell every playtester not to do X. I would rather do that because then I know I'm not going to cause other problems and frantically try to make a build in the background than try to fix it on the floor. I'd fix that that night, unless it's
Yeah, what
literally
about like
sinking the game.
balance adjustments? Like you see that all players are having a particular issue with something, and you're like, you know what? I think I have a better adjustment. It's like Sid Meier does that half it or double it thing. Like, but while you are at the convention on day one, you realize this boss is too hard. Do you want to spend the entire rest of the convention watching everybody hit that wall, or do you want to see if you can tweak and tune that boss for all of these brand new players?
I could definitely say like going into the convention, I would recommend if possible setting up a set of tools that you as the developer can adjust while they're playing. Like because usually you can have like a laptop and then a monitor facing them, and then on your laptop you might have some developer controls. So if something and or having a separate build with like a different version of the content, like because if you know in advance that this might be a challenge for players or the way that things work might need to be adjusted, and I want to see how that works. Creating some in-game dev tools or command lines to like adjust things on the fly with like a developer level build, I think is okay at a conference because you're not releasing that build publicly, but you are testing how things work on like live there. So I think having like a build specifically for the conference to test things that you're concerned about is a very good strategy.
Yeah, prepare for it. Sounds good.
It's a really actually interesting one, having some developer controls that allow you to adjust things on the fly. Obviously, that means you need to have predicted the problem before it happens, and takes a little time to make it. But I think there, are some simple tools that you can add. That's not something I've thought of before. I think is really smart. Like if I have the ability to just adjust enemy HP inside the game, that means I need no more builds. But if the player keeps having, I don't need to make a build to like fix it. But if the player's having issues on this same boss, I can at least turn the HP down a little bit and make it a little bit more feasible for them to play or something. That's very smart, Spencer. All right, Rick. I was gonna have you ask a second question. You want to come back up? You want to ask your second question there, Rick? You're currently muted.
Yeah, which question was it? Can you lead me to it?
Yes, you were asking basically about tangible means. You're asking essentially about like call to action.
Oh yeah, so your call to actions and so like when you are showing at a convention, you clearly have goals, whether it's getting UX experience or getting wish lists or people to join your Discord server. What kind of preparations do you make in order to maximize your efficacy of reaching those goals? Like how do you maximize your metrics? What can you say about that?
I would say like in part it depends on the goal. So like if you're trying to get like a Discord server more active, making sure that has like a proper onboarding process and is well categorized. So for when people come in, they know what they're doing in there. Is really important. Having like a printout of QR codes leading to your call to actions or business cards or stickers with QR codes on the back of them I've seen are all different methods that you can use. Handouts are great, printouts are great. Just make sure that you have some physical, tangible version of that at your booth. If you don't want to buy any extra merchandise, you can bring an extra monitor and change what your call to action on that monitor is at any given time. So you can switch out QR codes, switch out previews of things you want people to check out. But I would just say like make sure there's some part of your booth that's rather a handout or like a stand-up display of things that link to it, and making sure to direct the players to it because even if it's like a big shiny thing at your booth, if you're not personally talking to them about it, I think that's also you could be missing the point there. So basically handouts, things that stand up, directing players to it.
Mm-hmm.
Cool, thank you.
Yep.
And then I think I would add in, I like to think of like passive versus active booth presences and then kind of hybrid. So like what's the stuff in your booth that requires you to be talking about it? What's the stuff in your booth that can run entirely without you? And what's the stuff in the booth that needs some amount of time? I'd like to have a little smattering of each of those if possible. So like a great example of a passive one is some kind of photo op. so that they can go and take pictures, and it requires literally none of your time. But that way, there's something for people to do in the booth when you're busy with somebody else. Something like that really helps.
Yeah,
Um,
absolutely. And like
yeah.
usually you have like a rectangular shape of your booth, so like having a monitor that faces outside of your booth for people that are
Mm.
passing by is a huge one. We always like try to have like a big standing banner of like whatever game we're showing off, or showing the game's trailer like off to the side while we got people playing at the front of the booth. It kind of brings in more people from more directions.
Yeah, 100% on that one. Yes. Hamna, you want to ask the next question?
Hello, hi. Yeah, my question, Spencer, is what if the convention isn't majorly around games? Like, me, Jess, and Haley are going to do Play NYC with Anime NYC. So, Play NYC is majorly games as target audience, indie game developers, and people who want to play games. But it is also Anime NYC, which is majorly everyone just really loves anime, right? And this is our first time doing a convention like this, which isn't just for games. So I brought this question up when you were saying people there are majorly there to play games. So you don't need to try too hard. This is a tricky situation. I feel like we're going to navigate. Any advice would be appreciated here.
Yeah. I would say depending on like what the core theme of the conference is, kind of adjusting your level of knowledge expected from who's going to be at your booth, I guess. So like at a gaming conference, expect that people understand games, and like you can kind of skip over certain parts of explaining your game. Like people know how to use a controller and move in most cases at a game conference, right? But if you go into like a generic tech conference, is kind of where I've had other experiences at. They might not
Mm-hmm.
always know how to play games, or consider themselves good at games. So having like a different mental elevator pitch in mind, kind of more oriented towards the crowd, is very important. So for the anime one, think of a way you can have your brand or product in relation to like the theming of the conference, or the theming of, if you can figure this out in advance, like the booths around you, how you can kind of orient yourself within that space to fit in better,
Mm-hmm.
or stand out better,
Mm-hmm.
depending on your goals there. But I would definitely just like kind of do a mental reframing on how you will approach advertising what you are showing off, because
Mm-hmm.
every audience can be different, especially at like different themed conferences. Is how I can say it.
That makes sense. So our strategy is mostly around that in the sense that we are well aware that a lot of the people are going to be people who might also not know about games or might be really into games. So we do have that in mind, but that does make me feel better because I am a little bit happy stressed about the convention. So that makes me feel really, really much more confident about going to the convention now. So thank you for that. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think another thing is like when you're a game at a non-games conference, I think that's actually usually a better thing than not. Because I was
Mhm.
kind of saying this in the beginning of the call here, but like being a game in a space where it's almost like less expected or not expected helps you stand out better. And not only that, like you can kind of be a break from some of the more samey monotony of like whatever the conference could be themed around. So like, oh, I'm surrounded by anime and anime only, but oh, there's something more elaborate here that maybe I could like have a break at. And I
Yeah.
think that's a good space for like games to kind of serve at conferences sometimes.
Thank
I was
you.
actually Yeah, thank you, Hamna. I was actually, funnily enough, going to echo that, Spencer, and then you brought it up anyway. The idea that when you're running a booth, when you're running kind of a unique booth at a convention, so if you're the only game at a non-game convention, that can actually be incredibly powerful and is something for you to consider. If you can basically find a convention that has a believable, real Venn diagram where they will like your game, it can be incredibly powerful. My first convention that I ever ran on my own, anyway, uh, is still to this day one of the best conventions I've ever done, which was for when I was running my cat video game startup. I went to CatCon, which is a thing, first of all, for everyone to know about. That's a thing that happens every year. And CatCon is, of course, a million booths about like this new special litter box and like a place where you can buy catnip, and then this one weirdo with some video games. So we stood out super hard, and in that single convention, our email list went from like 50 people to 500 people, which was our main CTA at that convention. So don't be scared to actually do non-game conventions, is all I'm saying. Just make sure there is a real Venn diagram. Like they will care about your game in some capacity, but it can be super powerful if you do it right. All right. I was actually gonna ask Rick to ask a third question. You got a lot of good questions today, Rick. I forget which one it was. Do you know what it is?
I do.
Okay, great. That one.
All right. So we've talked about a lot of ways that you can, like, what you should do at a convention. What are some big mistakes that you want to avoid making that will make your booth not as successful?
Yeah, I think a
Great questions.
big one is you don't want to make your players feel like they're being like too watched, I guess is the best way to put it, like by you. Like don't be a helicopter game dev, I guess is the way I could phrase it out. If anything, a better strategy is like if you need help bringing people into your booth, sometimes like having one of your developers play it and then like watch them play it, like as if you're like an attendee is one way to bring people in a fun way. But definitely don't like sit right next to them, get in their face while they're trying to play your game, because you can kind of let's be more passive in your observation unless they want to have a conversation, right? Not everybody is the same. Sometimes you'll have introverts, sometimes you'll have extroverts. Kind of read to people as best as you can, and don't get in the way of your own product. Is something to definitely keep in mind.
I love that. No helicopter game diving.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes the players enjoy like you watching them is an experience that both of you share because they
Absolutely,
take
yeah.
like if you are enjoying watching them play and you're not like focusing on the mechanics. Sometimes players do really enjoy that. I found, but you're right. Sometimes you don't want to like be like, okay, I'm looking for this. Like,
Yeah,
you have to
definitely
do your
strike
job.
a delicate balance, because like make sure that they can enjoy your game without like revealing to them what your like exact goals are. Like, oh, we're trying to see what breaks here. Like what's tell me what you're thinking right now as you're playing this. Why did you do what you just did? Maybe you can have that as a conversation, like after the playtest, if it's something that like they want to
Yeah.
have a conversation about.
The most sacred rule of playtesting: shut up.
Yeah,
Just let them
basically that.
play.
Yeah, yeah,
And I think your point about reading the room is a really good one too, Spencer, because some people are going to enjoy kind of having the conversation as they play and learning about the game and getting to know you as a developer. But also think about the last time you were at like one of those like antique fairs where there's like a bunch of awnings and people kept asking you if you wanted to come buy their handmade bracelets, and you were like, oh God, sometimes you just want to go into the booth and not have to interact. So reading the room, I think, is a good last point. All right, we're gonna do, I think, one more question, but before then, it's time for the community question of the day, where we reiterate one of the most important things we learned from our guest, and we give 3 House Cup points to the person who gets the question right. If you're listening, speak this question out loud, speak the answer out loud. If you're here in the chat, you have the ability to earn points. So here's my question: what are 3 tips that Spencer gave us about setting up your booth? First person to type it in the chat. That's only 1 tip, Gwynnym. Bring a couch is 1. You've now helped everybody else. Comfy, says Wendy. Still only 1. What are 3 tips that Spencer gave us? But correct. Thank you, Wendy. What are 3 tips that Spencer gave us for setting up your booth? Cozy, prepare for the worst. And we got 2. We're crowdfunding this one. We're going to give the points out evenly across the board. I'm going to give like 5 more seconds. Rug. All right, you know what I'm gonna do? Nightmare just wrote rug. I'm gonna give points to both Nightmare and to Rowan and to Gwynnym. Why not? We'll give 1 point each. Gwynnym, Nightmare, and Rowan. And I'm sorry, Wendy, you said the same thing pretty much second time around. And also, you're a moderator. You don't need any points. I'll give you each 1 point. So let me know which houses you want to give those points to. All right, last question of the day is actually from Twiligny. I don't know how to say that name correctly. I'm going to invite you on stage. If you want to come up, you can come ask your question. Otherwise, I'll ask for you here.
Hi, my name is Elif. I'm from IGA cohort 17, and you pronounce my nickname like Twilight, but with line at the end.
Twilight. I love it.
Yeah, I am currently I'm interested in the production and project management side of gaming, and if it isn't too general, I would like to ask about what Spencer does to, like keep in tune with the team and their needs and their blockers and to like keep on top of everything basically.
Yeah, that's fair. I would say the number one thing, as kind of like an operations position or a project management position, is to make sure that that you can always keep in contact with everyone that you're working with. Like communication is the number one thing. So making sure that you and your team can all agree on the right place to communicate with each other. Like us personally, we have like a team Discord that we all have like a meeting at least once a week as many people as we can. And we have chats dedicated for each part of our team, whether it be like art, programming, or sound, where if something comes up and you need to work on it, make sure that like everybody that could be involved with that is at least notified. And keeping everybody in the loop about everything is really important on running a game production.
So basically like a good like chat slash like communication system and
Yes, absolutely.
updates.
Yeah. Yep.
Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you, Twilight. I'm going to try to make sure I remember how to say that. And as far as the question for kind of how much code or tech stuff to know, I think your point, Spencer, about just like as much as it takes to communicate effectively is really the answer.
Yeah.
I think like one of my favorite producers I've ever had was actually quite talented in the engine itself. So, she'd show up and be like, "Hey, I figured out that I don't know, this specific part of the code is broken, or like some specific asset is busted or whatever." She was savvy in actually jumping engine and understanding actual technical parts of the game. She definitely wasn't an engineer. She definitely wasn't like quite a technical person, but she knew enough to be able to really talk it through with us and understand what was being said. So I think that's kind of the bar.
Yeah, definitely just like learn the language of the people you're working with. So whether that's artists or programmers or sound people, is just like knowing at least how to talk about what they're working on. Like it doesn't mean you have to know exactly how to code, but talking about like the systems around the code, the interfacing around their code, or when it comes to arts or design, knowing design concepts at a level that is proficient, like more than like, oh, that's a nice circle, but like, why is that a nice circle? Is there good lighting on it? Is there good texturing on it? How the surfacing on everything? Just being able to use the right words and talk honestly with your teammates is this huge thing.
Yeah, I would say it's less about knowing to code. It's more about just understanding the engine and your stack. Having the lingo and having the jargon is really important for sure. Knowing what a shader is, knowing what it means that a texture is a certain size, all of that's important. You don't need to know how to do it, but to be able to talk about it is important.
And I think a big thing, if possible, is like if you're making documentation for your project, working with the people alongside you to write up really thorough documentation on like your tech stack and your pipeline, not only helps you understand it better, but also can help your teammates who may not understand that stuff better if it's especially written like within a document.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Awesome. All right. It is the end of the episode. We even went a minute or two over here. So before we say goodbye, Spencer, we like to assign homework on this podcast. So what is something that the audience can do in the next week? It'll take about an hour to practice some of what we talked about here today.
Yeah, I would say visit the schedule on fancons.com to see if there are any conventions that are like a good fit. I know that Willem also said like GameConf Guide is another good one. But in general, look up conferences around you, talk about them with your team, see if there are any that are good to go to, whether as attendees or as exhibitors, and just get thinking about it more often.
Awesome. All right. I'm going to modify that and force people to post about it. So go to fancons, go to fancons.com and or GameConf Guide and or anywhere that you can find conventions. And I want you to do a little research into those conferences. And then on LinkedIn, or if you're uncomfortable, you can just do it in our Discord. post and tag Spencer Cohen as well as the Indie Game Academy so that we can celebrate you and give you feedback and be excited for you about 1 to 3 conventions, we'll say, that you plan on attending in the next year. That's my modification to your homework. All right.
Fair enough.
Nice. I like forcing people to actually do it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Awesome. All right, it's time to go. Spencer, is there anything you'd like to plug here at the end, or any last words of wisdom you want to give?
Yes, extra credit if you wishlist Lockjaw Robo Royale on Steam and also join our Discord. I'll post a link to that in like our general chat or something like that afterward.
Absolutely. Yeah, go wishlist Lockjaw Robo Royale. I'm going to try to get it real quick before the end. We'll put links to anything that was mentioned down below as always, and join the Discord. It has been a fantastic chat. Spencer, thank you for being here. Thanks for answering all these wonderful questions, giving us some ideas about conferences. Heck yeah. Thank you for those who listened and for those who asked questions. And as always, if you enjoyed this episode, we ask that you send it along to just one other person who is somebody else who could learn about how to do indie conferences right. All right. Goodbye, everybody. Have a wonderful day.